Share via email. Report story. Chapter 3. The rest of the weekend had been a blur. Ochako and most of class stayed at Momo's party until the wee AM hours. After her talk with Izuku, she felt lighter, and better yet, no one had seen them together. Everyone else was consumed with their own lives, even the nosy Toru and Mina hadn't noticed she was absent for a long while. She tried to keep her euphoria a secret, for she could only imagine the guessing games the other girls would play to try and figure out how in the world her mood flipped 180 degrees. Still, Ochako found her bubbly self, with the help of just one more drink concocted by her pink friend, and enjoyed the company. It was 7 o'clock in the morning by the time the taxi dropped Ochako off at her apartment building. Monday appeared so quickly afterward that Ochako wondered if Sunday had even existed. A huge yawn overcame her face as she walked through the doors to the UQ offices, and Nijire Hado was there to point it out. "That's a big yawn," the blue-haired heroine commented with a giggle. "Yeah, got knocked right off my sleep schedule," Ochako answered, moving past Nijire absent-mindedly. "How was the weekend shift?" The Q word, Nijire answered. The office was playfully superstitious, and there was an unspoken rule to never say, "quiet," when describing how work was going, for there would surely be an emergency to attend to after its utterance. Ochako nodded at Nijire. Made sense, she had actually had the weekend to herself for once and not a single call in. Yukio covered the whole weekend, so she won't be in until night shift. She left me this list of reminders. Nijire waved around the piece of paper in her hand as she leaned up against the front desk. "Go get dressed, because I'm going to have you do the morning patrol, and also the afternoon one, too." Was Flashlight on weekend duty, too? "Nope. He's here. He's gonna go a little later than you, and going all by himself." "Isn't that so great? It was Yuki's orders. Right here on the note. I'm so proud." Ochako smiled. It was about time Yuta Kaijudento, hero name, Flashlight, started going out on his own and feel out the route for himself. He'll take south side, you take north side. Then you need to be back around noontime to get your intern, remember? Ochako had almost forgotten. Right, I'm guessing you want me to take him for the afternoon walk, huh?" "That's right, Tilda," Nijire said in a sing-song voice, nodding happily. "I have a bunch of stuff to take care of in the office today. We're getting a new case, we'll be getting at least one visitor, and I need to be here to see the work studies." "Don't worry about it, we'll handle the patrols," Ochako assured her elder. She quickly made her way to the locker rooms to change. It was already after 8, which meant the office hadn't been on patrol for at least 3 hours. There were other offices in the district, but it was important to keep a presence. Ochako quickly donned her pink and black suit and emerged from the locker room as Uravati. She checked herself in the wall mirror as she passed by, confident, strong, and successful. This alter ego thing was pretty alright. Her costume was generally the same as it had been in school. With the large, pink boots and pressure point bracers, she was ready to fly. She was also ready to be a first responder. A matching fanny pack now also hung off her waist that carried the essentials: her radio, her phone, and first aid materials. Compared to the villain takedowns and major disasters she had answered during her short tenure, the first aid calls were infinite. Promoted stories. You'll also like. I Am, sequel of, UR check mark 69.4K 1.8K. This book is the sequel of, You Are So Better. Read that first before going here. Tears of joy. Tears of joy. Thank you to that one reader that suggested this title. I can't see you sad face, but thank you. The hero who sings with a smile. 38.8K 365. Hi. Guys, this is my first story I write on Wattpad. I hope you like it. Hurt cause I love you to death. Izuocha. Ha. 8.7K 141. Class 1A is now Class 2A and is working to be better heroes due to events that had happened before. Deku has gotten strong feelings toward Uraraka during the summer as Mirko X Shy Male Reader 169K 1.1 Key. Don't own MHA. I hope you enjoy the story I made. Free. Oni Shots 149K 3K. This is a collections of free X readers. Requests on this are now closed. Own Fluke a Day 112K 8.2 kilo amperes. Collection of short Own Fluko for 365 days. Please check the second book for the rest of the day's update. Much needed love. Yandere Succubus Momo X Izu, 51.3K 809. After Wattpad had decided to delete this story out of nowhere, I and many reader were distraught. So I'm making a remake of the story from the ground up to compensate. Yuta Kaijudento also emerged from the locker room in his alter ego, Flashlight, and he shot a thumbs up to her, ready for a new day, with a new bout of confidence to get through it. He hung back as instructed by Nijire, and Uravati skipped out of the office and onto the sidewalk. Uravati was a familiar sight to the people of her district, especially to commuters. Her shifts usually ranged during the daytime, taking patrol usually during rush hour when everyone was heading to work or going home. People waved to her with smiling faces as they boarded the bus, and she waved back, doing her best to be bright and approachable, no matter the atmosphere, no matter the calls from days prior. Uravati enjoyed this time of day. Although there was nothing like taking down a villain, she had to admit that daytime patrol was the best time. Everyone was too busy trying to get to work to be committing crimes, and the lion's share of her rescues were from car accidents. An hour into her shift, Uravati found herself spacing out. She had walked this route a million times, or so it seemed, and she found herself forgetting how she even got to this point in front of a hair salon. The street was still bustling with cars, but by now, anyone getting to work this morning had arrived already. Uravati smacked both her cheeks in unison in an attempt to wake up and pay attention. Now was the time for petty, inexperienced robbers to do their bidding in broad daylight. Another hour passed and her radio remained silent and her phone didn't buzz. Nijire had been right. It was quiet. At that very thought, her phone buzzed once. A text. She rolled her eyes at how the universe worked and opened her phone, expecting to see a message from Nijire or Flashlight about some emergency or other. But it wasn't either of them, and the name on her cell phone screen reduced her back into Ochako standing there in Uravati's skin. Deku, are you in the office today? She didn't know how to respond. She didn't know why she didn't know how to respond. Then it all came back to her, the reunion, the drinks, the talk. Oh right, he's probably trying to set up lunch for today. Ochako thought. She hastily answered, typing each letter painfully slow on her pink flip phone. On patrol. IDK about lunch. Have an intern I forgot about today. She sent the message and then stood in place, frozen like a statue, waiting for her phone to buzz again. Only a minute passed, but her heart still sank. Worried and unnecessarily anxious, she typed to him again, "Rain check." He responded immediately. Deku, of course. She breathed a sigh of relief and put her phone back in her fanny pack. The rest of the morning went along smoothly, uneventfully. When her cell phone alarm warned her it was 11:30, she turned around and walked briskly back to the UQ offices. In 15 minutes, she reached the office building and entered the glass doors. Nijire was at Yuki's desk shuffling through files, prepared in her own hero costume now. As Ochako passed by, the older girl waved to her. "Uravity, I forgot to tell you something this morning," Nijire admitted. "So, I was reading the really long note Yuki left for me. Do you remember the apartment building collapse last week? And last month? And the one the month before that?" Vividly. Ochako answered, somewhat unnerved. She would have given anything to forget them, honestly, but they stuck in her brain like chewing gum in hair. The severed hand whisked through her mind again, and she sighed, trying to will it away, only for it to be replaced by the other gruesome things she'd been forced to endure. Charred bodies, some of them small. Oh. Well, since our office was a part of all the cleanup and recovery missions associated with them, the police department wants us to partner with them to catch the villain responsible, Nijire went on to explain. There are a couple other offices in the district and outside offices that are being held on standby, but yeah, we got the case. That's great, Ochako said, not exactly ecstatic about the promise of more recovery missions. Nijire didn't seem to notice as she continued, "So, long story short, Yuki thinks you should take this case. You're number one on it." Ochako's eyes widened as a lump in her throat threatened to strangle her. A case like this, of this magnitude, dropped into her lap without much warning. She remembered that Yuki promised to hand the next big case to her as a test to see if she was worthy of becoming a pro partner, but she hadn't expected it so quickly. All this, on top of mentoring a new intern. She bit her bottom lip to quell the disquiet building in her mind. Nijire stood before her with the widest, proudest smile on her face, and Ochako loosened, borrowing some confidence from her elder. Nijire wasn't a dense girl, though, and she noticed the slight pangs of nerves in her underling immediately. "You're not working on this alone," the older girl assured. "The police department sent one of their own as a partner. So, while he's doing the more detective-wise stuff, you're going to be assisting, and providing details of the recoveries, and hopefully working out a plan to catch the villain." "Wait, someone is here already." From the police department, Ochako inquired, suddenly putting the pieces of information together to form the new reality that was steadily making itself known. "Yeah, he's in the file room right now," Nijire answered, pointing to the oversized closet across the building. "Hey, I think you might know him." Ochako's mind was spinning. There was no way the universe worked like that, did it? She absent-mindedly said something in closing to Najire as she whipped around and made a beeline towards the file room in a power walk, not too frenzied to tip off Najire, but fast enough to immediately dispel the utter suspense writhing through her. She held onto the door frame as she peeked into the file room, a private, windowless room lined with file cabinets and other office supplies. On the floor he sat, leafing through the office files, no doubt digging up their reports on the downed apartment buildings. Unfortunately for poor Ochako's heart, he was too well aware of his surroundings and she hadn't exactly been quiet. His emerald eyes met hers through the relentless green mess of fluff, white and waiting for her to maybe say hello. You're here. Fantastic start. I am. I told you I was working on this case, didn't I? You didn't say you were working on it in my office. I only found that out this morning, too. We were texting this morning. Why didn't you tell me you were here? I figured you'd find out in 2 hours. Deku. So, you guys do know each other. Najire popped in, as if her quirk were teleportation. Ochako jumped at the sudden voice in her ear. Yeah, now I remember. You guys were in the same first-year class when me, Tagata, and Imajiki were in third year at UA. Yeah. It's all coming back. Deku stood up from the open drawer with a few files in his gloved hands and smiled to Najire. Good to hear. Yeah, sorry about this morning. Takes a cup of coffee or two these days, Najire admitted brightly as she headed back to Yukyu's desk. Ochako stared, still in shock, as Deku passed her with the files and sat at an empty desk in the main room. Usually, the desks here would be occupied by work studies, but Ochako figured if they had any, Najire probably sent them off on patrol with flashlight. Upon the desk Deku claimed was also a laptop and other folders whose contents were spilled across the surface. A few file boxes were stacked nearby, some of which were discolored and sagging with age. So, we'll be working together, it seems, Deku's voice cut through her thoughts. Why yeah, Ochako nervously answered. I have the intern coming in very soon, perhaps you can get us up to speed when he gets here. She looked up at the black and white clock behind Deku, read 12 o'clock, and sighed. Right on time. He actually should be here now. Ochako turned around and headed back towards the front doors, attempting to re-establish herself as Uravati. She needed to be professional, authoritative. The intern was a student from UA, so she needed to get on the Eraserhead, Midnight, and present mic level. On any other day, that may not have been too hard, but with Deku thrown into the mix, she found herself seesawing between capable hero and bumbling girl with a crush. She took a deep breath and arrived at the lobby where she saw Najire welcoming in a new hero she guessed was Asuka Dakuro, her intern. He was pretty tall, with raven black hair that fell past his ears, with 5 tall feathers like a crest on the top of his head. He seemed warm and welcoming as he spoke with Najire, despite his all-black attire. Uravati guessed the heavy black shorts, combat boots, and long jacket were cosmetic choices all to tie in with his hero name, Crow. The look would not have been complete without his quirk, 2 giant, black corvid wings he neatly folded behind him. And there she is. Najire noticed her from the corner of her eye. Uravati waved. You must be Dakuro, Crow. Welcome to the team. I'm positive Yukio already mentioned this, but I'll say it anyway, Nijire explained between them. You'll be working directly under Uravati here, and she's been assigned a new case just today, so, you should be learning a lot. It's so cool to meet you in person, Uravati. Crow extended his right hand to shake, coupled with an equally large smile. I'm pretty excited to get started. Good to hear. This one's going to be a doozy. Uravati shook his outstretched hand. She then thoughtfully turned to Nijire. Actually, Nijire, do you think there's time to introduce him to Deku? If we're going to all be working on this case, we should probably get more acquainted with each other and the case itself. Nijire nodded as she turned away. Totally. Go for it. Flashlight shouldn't be back for a little while. Uravati led Crow inside over to where Deku was working, and Nijire followed. Deku looked up as they all approached and stopped at the edge of the desk. Deku, this is Asuka Dakuro, the intern I was telling you about. His hero name is Crow. Uravati introduced the budding hero in training. Deku got up from his chair and the two young men shared a strong handshake in shared camaraderie. I guess that means you'll be working with us on this case. Hell yeah, I'm so pumped, Crow shouted. Nijire piped in as she sat on a neighboring desk. Yukio wouldn't tell us the full extent of your quirk. She wanted you to introduce it to us, but I can see you're a bird. So, you can fly, right? Why yes, I can fly. I've been practicing since I could carry my own body weight, and can reach some serious heights, Crow answered bashfully. But that's kind of a secondary thing. Crow seemed to shift on his heels, becoming quiet, shifting his eyes across the floor. Well, what else can you do? Nijire prodded. Crow scratched the back of his head as he looked around the room for the right words. He then sighed and said, with more confidence, let's just say my quirk is called Angel of Death. Ever since I can remember, I can sense the dead and dying from a distance, without looking. My quirk factor is in my nose, so for me, it's like a smell, but, I mean it doesn't smell bad. I just know what it means. That's a pretty amazing quirk, Deku commented. And flying gives you such an edge. You can canvas a huge area and pinpoint victims way faster than whole recovery crews. Crow was visibly shocked, and Uravati guessed he was assuming they would think his quirk quite macabre. Perhaps lots of people in his past thought it was. He was too inexperienced to know the truly horrifying things real heroes saw every day. He may have guessed, but never truly realized how incredibly useful his quirk could be. Yeah, we really could have used a quirk like that at the downed building last week, Uravati added. The praise was visibly melting Crow's embarrassment away, and he smiled. But I have to ask, why the hero named Crow? The quirk sounds more like what a vulture can do. Yeah, I get that a lot, Crow sighed, defeated. No, it's really such a smart name. Deku gushed to his fellow young hero. It relates to the European myths associating crows with death, right? Crow lit up. Yes. Thanks, man. Finally, someone I don't have to explain it to. Crows are also scavengers. They eat carrion just like vultures do, so that's why they're associated with death in graveyards. I figured I would shoulder it and become a hero in support of my fellow corvids. He posed, one hand on his hip and the other pointing at himself with his thumb, smirking. Deku and Uravati laughed, but Nijire leaned forward, intrigued. Is that really why you wanted to be a hero? And no, Crow held up his hands in defense, clearly unaccustomed to Nijire's childlike curiosity. He became serious, considering the atmosphere in his own past. I became a hero because I can sense death, and, I was sick of not being able to do anything about it. Uravati patted him on the shoulder. That sounds like what a true hero would say. Crow smiled again. It was clear to her that Crow was exactly the way she and Deku had been when they were in school. Ambitious, with a drive to make the world a little less dark. Uravati could only imagine the torture of having a quirk like that, though. The young Dakuro must have grown up being unaware of what he was smelling all the time, and his parents, if either of them shared the quirk, were probably unable or unwilling to really tell him the truth. Unless he found out on his own. His quirk probably never made him popular in school, and she wondered if he ever shared it much, given by the way he clammed up telling his hero agency about it. Hey, thanks, Crow said. So, now that we all know my quirk, and I already know yours, what's this villain's quirk? Deku answered. Good question. That's one of the mysteries we need to solve. Deku dug out a piece of paper from the mess on his desk, reading the wording there and scouring it for an answer. So far, no one really knows what his quirk is for sure or how it works, but it seems to be an explosive kind of quirk. He mulled around the thought and rested his gaze on Uravati. She felt the notion like a sixth sense. Kinda like Kachan, Bakugo, Deku and Uravati said at the same time, and then both grinned, leaving Nijire and Crow to stand confused. Bakugo probably sneezed twice wherever he was at the moment. Deku continued, however, no one's really seen him use it, so we can't be certain how he does it. All I have to go on right now is that he's newly arrived in Japan. He's originally from America. Or at least, that's what we think right now. There were extremely similar cases, with really similar modus operandi, that happened in Alaska almost 20 years ago. Crow shuffled a bit. Am I the only one who doesn't know what a modus operandi is? Uravati took this chance to fully step into the role of teacher as she gently turned to her student and said, it's basically the how, when, and where a criminal commits crimes. Crow nodded in understanding. That was easy enough. Except we don't really know the how, don't understand the when, and where is now a wholly different country. His motive is also a mystery. All that has remained the same is the destruction he causes and the informed way he does it. He seems to understand how buildings are built and the best way to break them. All we have to go on is cold case files and the recent reports of the downed apartment buildings. Not to mention it appears that he is capable or willing to work with other villains, so their motives need to be discovered as well, and then we can assume they have similar ideals. Deku explained with his hand to his chin, and his voice becoming a studious mutter. Like everyone who didn't know Izuku Midoriya, Nijire and Crow became a little unnerved as his thoughts spilled out of his mouth as quieter and quieter mumbles that Uravati was convinced only Ochako could hear. Uravati cut him off. It sounds like you have your work cut out for you, then. I know you'll figure it out. Deku stopped muttering and grinned at her familiar encouragement. Thanks. I really should get back to it, then. Yup, and she addressed Crow, ought to go out on our first walk. Walk. Area patrol. Great timing. Flashlight should be back any moment, Nijire commented. The three of them let Deku be at his desk to become quickly engrossed back into the case filings he retrieved prior. As Uravati and Crow passed the main desk where Nijire stopped following, she felt the need to warn the older girl. Just so you know, he's probably going to be muttering like that all day, Uravati informed Nijire weakly. Nijire grimaced. He's gonna scare my work studies. Both girls giggled nervously, but Nijire was still deadly serious. Why don't you put him in my cubicle, then? Uravati suggested. It will give him more privacy. Don't tell him you're moving him over the muttering. Fine with me, Nijire said as she went back to her own file stacked on Yuki's main desk. With that, Uravati turned and led Crow outside into the blazing summer heat. She was glad her hero suit was so thin. Besides her helmet, the suit let her breathe. In the winter, she would opt for a thicker version, but for now, she had to wonder how Crow was surviving. He didn't seem to mind the heat, and Uravati guessed that there were just some people accustomed to the equivalent of an oven. The sidewalks were definitely hot enough now to cook eggs, and thankfully it was afternoon. The sun was starting its journey back down towards the horizon, creating shadows behind the buildings. They turned their first corner and were relieved of the sun's rays. Crow was visibly pumped, still, too excited to let the heat damper his attitude. So, I get to work under you and Deku. I can't believe it, this is my lucky day. She arched her eyebrow, then softened. We're all guys this into heroes. Seems like you have a thing for sidekicks. Well, yeah, you're also relatable. Watching sidekicks become full-fledged heroes, nothing beats that. Crow said enthusiastically. Uravati had to admit he had a point. After all, once he was out of school, he'd hopefully be a sidekick himself somewhere. In that case, big, top 10 heroes like Yuki weren't a good judge of the near future. Unfortunately, she couldn't continue the conversation as another voice butted in, an annoyed shudder ran through her. Uravati, called a hulking voice from behind the pair. Got yourself an intern. She knew who this was. Enough time in this district had helped her become acutely aware of the heroes and sidekicks in neighboring offices. In fact, the UQ office shared much of its coverage and patrol routes with them, so Uravati had come to know everyone, including this sidekick clad in white and red. Good afternoon, Current, Uravati answered the electric-based sidekick. Despite his quirk, the guy was nothing like Kaminari and reminded her more of Sato. Huge, muscular, and not the handsomest creature in town, he towered over even the lanky crow. Had she been a shallower lady, she could have likened him to an ogre, but at least his demeanor was friendly, for the most part. If anything, Uravati found him irritating, but she could remain civil. This is Crow, our newest intern. He just started today. I bet he's got some dark powers, current guest, leaning into Crow with a hand clasped to his chin, obviously coming to this conclusion from Crow's black clothes. He's like a mix of Hawks and that other bird sidekick, what's his name? You're comparing me to Tsukuyomi. Thanks, guy. Crow clearly appreciated the sentiment of being likened to Tokiyami in Dark Shadow, throwing Current for a loop. Uravati smiled. It seemed that Crow appreciated everyone from her former class, no doubt because they all shared the same alma mater. If he was striving to be at least on par with Deku, Tsukuyomi, and her other classmates, he was going places. Yeah, short kid. Try to be your own person, though, you're not going to go anywhere being like other heroes. Current didn't let him down gently and Crow stood there, thankfully unconvinced. How dare he try to crush her students' enthusiasm? She remained calm and hoped that was the end of his aggravating, blunt behavior. But it wasn't. Current turned his attention away from Crow and squarely on Uravati where she least wanted it. Anyway, Uravati, I've been thinking. If today turns out to be quiet again, perhaps I can pick you up at the offices later for some dinner. I saw the ramen bar finally opened up a few blocks down, could be a great place for our first date. And how dare he use the Q word? Now she knew something would come up on this patrol, but at least Crow would get some experience. For all the pros the morning and afternoon rush hour patrols had, this was the con. Current was on duty. If their paths ever crossed, it was always taken as an opportunity to ask her out. Uravati sighed, knowing this was coming, but had hoped it wouldn't as long as Crow had been standing there. Fat chance. She always let him down gently, though, in hopes he'd take the hint. So many finer gentlemen hadn't been given a chance, and they took it in stride and assumed she was a busy woman. Of course they would, that's the reason she would give before she realized what the real reason was. Now that the really good reason was muttering over case files back at the office, Uravati's patience with Current had run dry. She giggled in frustration, something only Crow captured. What part of, no, didn't you get last time, Current? Ah, come on Uravati. It's one date. It won't kill you, Current pleaded and whined. Gimme a chance. I think we could be great together. He was almost as bad as Mineta. Almost. I'll see you tomorrow, Current. Crow and I have more ground to cover. And with that, Uravati continued to walk straight on their intended path, with plans to change up the route to avoid any more interactions with her stubborn admirer. Crow caught up with her as she turned down an avenue. Well, that was weird, Crow commented when he caught up to her side. Yeah, well, we're all still human with human problems, Uravati said exasperated, shrugging with a smirk that indicated how done she was with Current's relentless begging. Crow asked seriously, why didn't you just tell that guy you have a boyfriend? Uravati answered, Just 'cause I don't want to date him doesn't mean I want to lie to him. He should just accept I'm not interested. Crow looked forward, a wave of confusion washing over him as his brow furrowed in thought. Oh. No. I didn't mean to lie to him. He should take no for an answer. I actually thought you had a boyfriend, like. I don't know, it looked like you were seeing Deku. Uravati stopped and spun around to face her confused student. The memories of her talk with Izuku and her wild desires from the past weekend presented themselves in her mind like exhibits to a crime she committed. Her voice rose an octave. Who? What? Gave you that idea? Crow shrugged. Yeah, I guess the media would be all over that if it were true. You guys just seemed so close before. Uravati took a breath to steady herself. Oh. We were best friends in high school. We were in the same class, Uravati explained. We even took the entrance exam together. Okay, that I didn't know. That's so cool, Crow said, completely missing the blush on his sensei's cheeks. I didn't know you guys had been in the same class. You were graduating third years the year I started at UA. Yup, Uravati squeaked, leading the conversation away from her prospects in being with Izuku. Red Riot, Ingenium, Tsukuyomi, Kriti, Ground Zero, we were all in the same class. Whoa, that's nuts. You guys must have been a master class. Crow gushed. I'd love to meet all of them. Uravati nodded. Perhaps that could be arranged. What with the case they were working on, they'd need outside support at some point, she figured. As they continued on their walk, it became more routine. They grabbed lunch at a local deli and became more acquainted. Uravati gauged what Crow already knew about basic hero work, assuming correctly that he'd had work-study sessions before, scored above average in class, and even had a previous internship in his second year. Does it bother you that people compare you to Hawks all the time? Nah. I interned with him last year, and beside the bird thing, we're pretty different. How's that? He's more of an undercover kinda guy and I'd prefer to do more rescue and recovery. That's why I switched to Yukyu's office. I know that's not all you do, but I think my quirk could get more use with you all. Well, we're glad to have you on board. I hate to say this, but I expect we'll have work we could use your quirk at sooner than later. Crow nodded knowingly, keeping his eyes on the pavement. That was the point of his being here. After all, I guess, the more time it takes Deku and the police department to figure this guy out, the more casualties there will be. Uravati nodded. Yeah, villains don't stop until they are stopped. As the pair approached a large, city bank, two young women clad in summer dresses exited and walked down the steps. One of them caught sight of Uravati, slapped the other girl on the shoulder, and both of them became quite excited. They bounded down the steps and up to their favorite pink hero. Uravati breathed a sigh of relief. Fans. Uravati. Uravati. Thank you for all your hard work, one shouted. We saw you working so hard with that other sidekick last week on the news. The other said, we hope you catch that fiend. Uravati beamed. Thank you both. Lots of offices and the police are working hard on the case. One woman turned to Crow. Are you another sidekick? You'll learn a lot from Uravati. Oh, I'm just an intern, Crow said bashfully, scratching the back of his head. This is Crow. He's a student at UA and just started his internship with our office today, Uravati said to her fans. What's your quirk? One of the women asked, intrigued. Crow became even more nervous at this question. Expected as it was, Uravati was sure they wouldn't be as accepting as Najire and Deku had been. Well, Utsi, Crow started to find the words but cut himself off, becoming deathly silent. He sniffed the air like a distracted canine, his face turning stern. He looked past the women, who had become rightfully creeped out, and straight ahead to the bank they had exited just minutes before. Uravati, could you follow me? Sure, she answered, and turned back to her fans. Sorry, excuse us. That's fine, one said. Both women watched in confusion as the heroes walked past them down the sidewalk. Crow stopped just in front of the bank. It was a large, rectangular building nestled between two taller buildings, stairs spreading wide onto the sidewalk from the entrance. Peering through the glass doors to the line of people waiting for the teller, Crow stared inside waiting for the ball to drop. Uravati looked inside as well when she caught up to him. Although she saw nothing out of the ordinary, now that she knew the scope of his quirk, she held her breath. At that moment, an elderly man in shorts and a t-shirt clutched his arm, his face straining, his eyes shut in pain. He then fell to the marble floor as the young woman beside him screamed in shock, her face contorting into a visage of worry and fear. She fell to her knees just beside him. The young heroes sprang into action, bounding up the steps and crashing through the door. Please stand back, everyone. Give him some space. We're both heroes on duty, Uravati shouted to the crowd who had moved in, as if instinctively, to get a better look at the emergency. Thankfully, the sea of confused and concerned faces backed away and both heroes plopped down to the floor on their knees on either side of the patient. Crow nodded quickly to Uravati that his quirk was telling him this was serious. He avoided saying too much, or anything, really, waiting for Uravati's lead. Okay. Follow me, I'll start compressions, you'll be back up, Uravati said seriously. This wasn't her first time administering first aid, and thankfully it seemed that Crow also knew what to do. He nodded confidently and then turned to the teller behind him. You, call 911, he turned to another teller. Get us the AED, if you have one. Meanwhile, Uravati quickly retrieved 2 rubber thimbles and put one on each thumb. The last thing she needed was to make this guy float. She then put her left hand on top of the right balled in a flat fist, rested this arrangement on the patient's chest and used all of her weight to push down over and over again as she counted to 30. He was a fairly large man, older but not as elderly as she had first thought. His hair was black but heavily sprinkled with white to show his age, like salt and pepper. Wrinkles had begun to crinkle and crease the skin on his forehead and near his eyes. When her count reached 30, she stopped to rest. Pushing down on this man's chest enough to do anything was taking everything out of her and she exhaled audibly. She then went back at it for another 30 compressions. For this minute, Crow sat on his knees vigilant, waiting to be passed the torch. He spread his wings to ensure people were staying at a distance, but the crowd couldn't help but gawk, whisper, and murmur. No one else was coming forward with first aid experience, so it was just going to be the two of them, Uravati thought grimly. Her back was already starting to ache. The only person Crow couldn't keep away was the young woman who had been with the man prior. She was now in tears, clutching her purple purse to her own chest, her blonde bangs sticking to her forehead from nervous sweat. Will my dad be okay? What is happening? She sobbed as Uravati finished her second round. She exhaled loudly again, exhausted. The anti-gravity hero nodded to her young charge to begin his set. We're doing everything we can, Uravati assured the young woman in a stern, confident voice. She made sure not to smile, made sure not to promise anything. She wasn't sure what was going on with this man, but the grim look in Crow's eyes told her it wasn't good. She couldn't promise much to this woman, not much older than she. Again, Uravati pushed away the suggestion that they had something in common. The idea that she could be in this situation one day with her own beloved father threatened to strain her focus. The woman choked and hiccuped on her own sobs as she nodded. The commotion in the bank quieted and Uravati could hear the wail of an ambulance in the distance ever so slightly. Damn, they were quick. Perhaps someone had already been on the horn when they burst through the doors. Perhaps the roads were clear enough to let the ambulance run at full speed to their location. Perhaps the ambulance hadn't been far away to begin with. Whatever it was, she was thankful. Please save him, the woman cried again, loudly in her ears. Crow finished his set of compressions and then another before Uravati took over again. He took a deep breath and cracked his fingers. I guess they don't have an AED. Crow murmured. They gotta, it's a bank, right? Uravati couldn't answer because she was counting, but she also wondered what was taking so long. She had to remember it had only been a few minutes since they began. I see the ambulance. It's almost here, yelped a man with compound eyes at the front door. A bunch of civilians had put themselves on door duty, shooing other customers away as they tried to enter the bank. Uravati was always so glad when people stepped up to help. There was only so much a sidekick and her intern could do. They didn't have the equipment, nor the advanced training in medicine, or even a recovery girl like Quirk to really save this man. This really was all on the paramedics who were closing in on their location. Uravati had to admit she was impressed with Crow. He had trusted his Quirk and they arrived on scene faster than anyone could have asked for because of it. She mused that if she had been on this patrol by herself, those precious seconds, perhaps even whole minutes, could have been lost. Still, the ambulance seemed like it was coming down the street in slow motion as Uravati and Crow switched again. Finally, one of the bank staff emerged from a far corridor at the back of the bank with the AED, and rushed to their location just as the paramedics were let in by the civilians at the door. In a flash, both Uravati and Crow disengaged from the man on the floor to hand the scene over to humanity's first aid heroes. The rest was a blur as Uravati and Crow instantly switched to crowd control, keeping people at a distance. The people in the bank watched as the man was whisked away in the ambulance, his daughter jumping into the cab, too. Police were on scene just as quickly. He may have been saved thanks to your quick response. Thank you, the police officer said as he finished getting his statement from Uravati. All in a day's work, sir, Uravati nodded. She noticed Crow as the police officer walked away, his face still full of grief. Uravati cocked her head to the side in question, and Crow shook his head as he heavily stuck his hands in his pockets. Not here, he mouthed. Well, we can leave, Uravati told him. No need for any clean up, we've already thanked everyone for helping. We can go. Yeah, I'd like that, Crow said in a low voice. Once out on the street and past the crowd that had only just begun to disperse, Crow spoke, disappointed. That guy is not making it, Crow told Uravati. We did everything, but it was really no use. And I knew it the whole time. Is that why you were so quiet? Yeah, but this is just the one thing I never get and no one has really explained it to me. Crow stopped on the sidewalk, his hands still in his pockets. The afternoon was transforming into evening now, the sun getting lower, the sky turning into a darker yellow, almost orange. The heat lingered though, even in the shadows cast by the towering buildings. Uravati stayed silent, letting Crow elaborate. I knew he wasn't going to make it, I knew it, that was the truth. That's what we were dealing with. Didn't his daughter deserve to know that? They don't want to hear that. But it's the truth. Uravati nodded. He was so skilled already and yet so naive. She couldn't be surprised, though. She had been this naive, too, once. During all their training she guessed that bedside manner was an afterthought. Even during the license exam, they weren't told why one way to talk to victims was better than others. Why downplaying obvious disaster was preferred over the truth. Yes, this was a victim's worst day ever, but didn't they deserve the truth, an agreement, a validation of their worry? No, people say they want the truth. They ask what's going on and they think they want to hear the honest breakdown, Uravati started. But they really don't want it, they won't accept it, especially in that situation. If we told that woman her father was going to die no matter what we did, she wouldn't believe it. Uravati bit her lip. She wasn't a psychologist. How could she explain people's stubbornness in times of crisis? Or how gullible they could be? How much they wanted to cling to good news, even when it was fabricated and made no sense. When it was an obvious lie. Everything will be okay. She remembered herself saying to countless people, some of whom never saw the outside of their hospital rooms afterward. Was she a liar? Even when she had told the truth, all they would scream was, no. No. It can't be. Uravati shook those memories from her mind and addressed Crow, who was still confused. She knew he'd only learned the virtues of small words and fake positivity with more experience. She would have blamed us instead, Uravati said quietly. She would have assumed we didn't give it our all. It's just better to tell them we are doing everything we can. Be neutral, or be positive, even if it's a lie. That really sucks, Crow murmured. It is, but it is still the truth, she tried. We are trying our best. And then when our best isn't enough, they forgive us because they believe we were just as hopeful as they were. That we were there with them. I guess that makes sense. Still, that doesn't sound very heroic. She couldn't agree more, but the results didn't lie. Calming people down was the only way to ensure they cooperated, and if that meant withholding the truth, then so be it. Uravati wasn't sure if Crow understood still, but it wasn't something she could teach him. He'd have to muddle and meander through that darkness of the real-world heroes faced himself. The rest of their walk was pretty silent and unremarkable. It seemed Current's use of quiet was worth only one emergency today. As the sun snuck behind the buildings and cast the city in a twilight afterglow, Uravati and Crow headed back to the UQ offices. They'd have to file the report, and she'd have to show him how to go about that. Find the form, fill it out, file it away, report to UQ what a fine job her new intern was already doing. Say goodbye for the day. Uravati parted with Crow and made her way to the locker room to change. Her hero costume, as breathable as it was still soaked with sweat. She stepped into the stall and peeled Uravati off her skin to reveal plain Ochako again. The pink and black suit would have to go through the wash tonight if she was to wear it again tomorrow for the usual grind. The cool air brushed against her naked skin, lapping up the sweat, leaving her cold. She wiped away the moisture with an old towel she kept in the shower stall. As she changed, she heard some rustling next door. "That you, Yuta?" Ochako called out. "Yes, ma'am," he called back, perhaps also peeling off his hero flashlight from his clammy skin. "Get anything on your stroll with the work studies?" "Nada. You?" "Well, we ran into Current." "Oh, joy. Yep." And he had the audacity to say the Q word. "And ya got something, huh?" "You bet. Nice cardiac arrest. That guy's a dick. Why don't you take the South Walk tomorrow?" "I'm thinkin' 'bout it." Ochako called back as she put on her street clothes and emerged from the stall. She could faintly smell the stink of her own sweat, and applied deodorant before leaving. Yuta hadn't exited with her. "Well, I'll see you tomorrow," Ochako shouted back. "See ya," he answered as the door closed behind her. She had no reason to, but Ochako strolled over to her cubicle and should not have been surprised to see Deku there. He was still clad in his green hero costume, rummaging and muttering over the case files, all these hours. You're going to burn yourself out," Ochako said shakily from the door frame. He jumped slightly from the sudden sound of her voice, and Ochako guessed he had been mostly alone all day with his thoughts. "Please tell me you at least ate something since I last saw you," she added. "Yes. Yeah, I did," he answered, quick to assure her, a bit of red streaked across his face. He had to know that she would worry about him. "How was your patrol with Crow? He seems like a good guy." "Mostly uneventful, but we had some action," Ochako summarized with a shrug. "It's getting late, and I'm gonna to head home. Now maybe you should too. We can work on the case again tomorrow with fresh eyes." Deku stared at her for a moment, then looked down at the mess of papers ahead of him. She could see it on his face. He hadn't gotten very far today and it weighed heavily on him. What Crow had said earlier that day was true. The longer it took to catch this villain, the more casualties there would be even after 2 years fully thrust into hero work. His heart was still soft and Ochako had to admire that. The job could wear down even the most stalwart heroes, and there was nothing more tiring, more heartbreaking, more exhausting than rescue and recovery. Seeing mangled bodies of all sizes was something she had had to get used to, and to do that, her heart hardened a bit. Putting on a false sense of positivity and spoon-feeding it to victims was a chore she did gladly in order to move from point A to point B. The truth was quickly thrown out if there was no use for it, and Crow's questions about it suddenly irked her more as Deku nodded and agreed with her that he ought to get some shut-eye. Ochako watched as Deku attempted to clean up the work area, or at least get the files into some kind of organized mess. No one was in the office now, except for Yukio for yet another grueling overnight shift. Maybe she could tell him now, but her mouth stayed welded shut, the words in her heart never escaped. Deku said something to her, low and soft, but she missed it as he passed by her and headed toward the locker rooms to change back into Izuku. When the door closed behind him, it almost felt too poetic, and her chest burned as that axiom died in her throat again. What was its use, anyway? Somewhere down the line, she stopped telling the truth altogether, and even when she did, they were half-truths. She had to as Uravati, she surmised, to move forward as a hero, and now it seemed like it had bled into her personal life, or was it the other way around? Putting up a front was something she had done since forever. Hiding her true feelings was something she always did. Whenever they threatened to get in the way of anything, they were relegated for a more convenient time that never promised to arrive. It all boiled down to a single fact she realized as Izuku emerged from the locker room Deku disappeared in, and he gave her a smile, thankful that she had waited for him so they could leave together. His eyes melted her, but she put up that trusty wall, and smiled back. She wasn't brave enough for the truth. Chapter 4. It would be a few more days before Uravati saw Deku again. It was like he had never been there, and the only clues he had left behind were the case files from the police department and a text letting her know he was busy chasing smaller criminals uptown. She relished in the butterflies that fluttered in her chest upon seeing his name on her screen, but realizing it, scolded herself for being so pathetic. The other night when he was here she could have asked him to dinner, could have made herself an opportunity, but, instead, missed it again. It wasn't as if he were a slippery fish, she just refused to cast the line time and time again. Is it someone special? Came Crow's voice crashing into her thoughts in an inquisitive tone as he looked up from the piece of paper he was writing on. Uravati ripped her eyes off the screen as she whipped her head to the side to address her raven-like intern in a full blush. They were sitting at one of the spare desks in the main atrium with forms, files, and lunch littered in front of them. The morning patrol had been quite eventful. A number of car accidents between commuters and a petty theft had provided Uravati with a number of simple jobs she could use to teach Asuka Dakuro, hero name, Crow, the Yukio office's newest intern. Now, Crow was sitting at the desk filling out his very own job form all by himself while Uravati supervised. She had to focus and remain his teacher, but he caught every damning thing she did. "Nope, it's no one," she squeaked. "Oh, do you smile like that at every text you get, then?" Over the past week, Uravati had learned much about her intern's mannerisms, namely that he was straightforward, spoke his mind, and had no filter. If he had a question, a comment, or concern, she would hear it in that way. He was a lot like Suyu, but he was also quick to become comfortable around her, enough to crack jokes, jab at her playfully, and get on a last name basis. Although she welcomed the closeness, Uravati still had a hard time differentiating between the times he was being sarcastic, humorous, or serious. They seemed to all blend together, and right now, she couldn't tell if he was just being a little snot or not. "Oh, hem. Let me see your form. How did you do?" Uravati shot back, trying to play along, but also to get him off her back. At this rate, he'd figure it out. Crow tore the paper from the table in a frenzy and held it as far away from her as possible. "No, I'm sorry, I'm not done yet." "That's what I thought," Uravati said with a smirk. "Do you need help?" "Nope, I got this." "Okay, then." A few minutes passed. It was silent in the office this afternoon. Flashlight was out on patrol with the work studies still. Yukio was Mia after back-to-back night shifts, and no one was scheduled to visit today. Najire kept her role as head supervisor in Yukio's absence, and sat at her desk rummaging over older files, the computer, and answering the phone. It was a slow, run-of-the-mill day, it seemed. Uravati noticed Najire get up from the desk and walk over to where she and Crow were sitting. "You mind holding down the fort?" Najire asked, her hands behind her back. "Sure, where are you going?" Uravati answered. "I'm taking your patrol. Deku will be returning later today and I want you two to become acquainted with the case," Najire explained, pointing at her and Crow. "He worked on it non-stop on Monday, so I'm sure he has something to report. Plus, I think it might just be healthier for him to talk to other people." Uravati giggled. So, she had been right, he really had muttered all day like she said he would. "I bet you also could use the air, too." "Oh, yeah," Najire agreed, nodding furiously. "I didn't become a hero so that I could sit behind a desk and play secretary. I'll see you guys later." With that, Najire grabbed a radio and stuffed it into her own fanny pack before disappearing behind the wall that separated the main lobby from the main atrium. Uravati heard the thick glass doors close behind her elder. She couldn't help but be a little excited to work more closely with Deku, and it showed. "So, it was Deku," Crow teased. "Oh, I'm sorry, are you all done with that form already?" Uravati asked sarcastically as she slipped the paper out from under her student and studied it. Crow froze. "This is awfully incomplete. I'm disappointed," he whined in protest. "I wasn't done." "I'm sorry. Your sorries mean nothing to me, Dakuro." It wasn't until just after 2:30 in the afternoon that Deku came through the front door. Thank goodness, because Uravati was running out of tedious things to have her intern do, and he was slouched over in the chair he had brought to Yukio's desk, waiting to be taught all about the telephone. Deku passed them as he walked into the atrium. His boots were dirty, and the fabric of his hero costume was dark with sweat around his neck and under his arms. Likewise, his normally fluffy hair was stuck to his forehead and the back of his neck. The oven was still turned up high outside, it seemed. Oh, escaped his throat as he realized Uravati and Crow were the only ones in the office, and they were sitting where he probably expected Nijire. Catch the bad guys? Uravati asked, summoning Ochako's bubbly tone, welcoming him back. Deku gave her a weak smile. He was so humble about his hero work. We did. Also looks like it's still hot as hell out there, my guy, Crow commented, sitting up straight. Yeah, it is, Deku said as he removed his face mask from around his neck and unzipped his costume down to his chest, enough to let the air conditioning in. He followed the curve of his neck to peel the fabric from his skin. I'm glad I left a spare costume here, because I need to get out of this right now. Uravati did not let the idea of Deku undressing distract her into becoming Ochako right now. Sounds good. We'll wait for you in my cubicle. Nijire wants us to talk about the case with you. Definitely. I'll be out in a minute, he said and disappeared into the locker room. Uravati got up from her seat behind the main desk and grabbed the wireless receiver from the phone dock. She then led Crow to her cubicle at the back of the main atrium, beyond the small sea of work-study desks. All of Deku's files were still stacked up in exactly the same way he had left them Monday. Uravati had avoided disturbing the arrangement all week. Her cubicle was somewhat bare, but she had made it her home away from home over the 2 years she occupied it. Besides the office computer, her rolling computer chair, and 2 conference chairs, Uravati had purchased a few things to personalize the space, namely random office supplies in her favorite hue of pink. A calendar featuring puppies, ducklings, and other cute animals hung on the far wall so she could always reference it. Right next to her UA diploma, and a small, glass bowl of candy sat right next to the keyboard of her desktop. What really made this space her own, however, were the few framed pictures she had hung up. One of her parents, one of her and Tsuyu, and an old shot of her, Iida, and Izuku still in high school. All 3 were even still in their UA uniforms. Of course, it was that latter picture that caught Crow's eye. You weren't kidding when you said you guys were close friends, he commented, looking at the picture intently. It's kind of sweet, ya know. You get to work together on a big case, get to catch up. That's really nice, isn't it? The nuance of knowing sarcasm that laced each word out of his mouth didn't escape her. 5 days, and already the kid was so learned in the ways of Ochako Uraraka. Yup, was all she could and would say. Content, Crow moved on. Hey, isn't that the new Ingenium? And that's Froppy, too, isn't it? He said, becoming more excited. I told you we had all been in the same class. Yeah, but it's just so cool that you are all such good friends, also. You don't have any friends in your class, she was half joking, expecting him to become bashful and admit that what he said didn't make sense, but he shook his head instead. Well, it's more like having 19 separate rivalries, he said matter-of-factually. He didn't seem to be bothered by it as he shrugged. I don't expect to still hang out and see any of them after we graduate, on purpose. I'm better friends with you than I am with any of them, believe it or not. Uravati found this peculiar, but took it as an opportunity to get back at him for his teasing before. Maybe they don't understand your humor. Crow guffawed as he sat in one of the conference chairs. Yeah, I wish that was the reason. He tapped his nose and Uravati immediately knew, it was his quirk they didn't appreciate. She sat in the other chair next to him with a worried look. Yes, his quirk was macabre, but how could fellow heroes not see the use in it? It had only been a week, and already Uravati felt as though her call rate had jumped at least by half, with Crow being able to sniff out a call before it even came in over the radio. His nose was so sensitive he had even been able to pinpoint exactly where an unconscious child had been hiding in a house fire that week, and she had survived because of it. Crow just shrugged. He clearly didn't need anyone's approval, and although he was still less inclined to introduce the quirk to anyone, he wasn't shy about using it. Before she could say anything else, Deku came through the opening to the cubicle, in a fresh hero suit, ready to go over the files. Both Crow and Uravati smiled in greeting, itching to hear about the case. Okay, so, here's where I'm at right now, Deku began, taking a seat in Uravati's rolling computer chair. Our suspect appears to be an older gentleman who began his terrorist attacks in America. Looking at the first crime in the series, he began his path of destruction much earlier than I originally thought, about 50 years ago. 50 years, Uravati exclaimed. What, was the guy one of the first people to have a quirk? Crow commented sarcastically. I think quirks have been around way longer than that, Deku said, missing the sarcasm. But, it was strange, at first I didn't know why this first case was included. Why is that? Uravati asked, cocking her head to the side. Because, it's very unlike all of the other crimes we can easily connect to this guy, Deku continued. Uravati could see that he was trying hard not to mutter as he explained this to them. Well, what makes his operation so obvious is how big it is. He is able to bring down huge, multi-story buildings, but in this case, he didn't do that. Both Crow and Uravati exchanged glances. This first one took place in a tiny, remote town, and instead of destroying the buildings, just the people inside were found dead many months after the crime occurred. So, how did you connect that with our demolition guy? Crow asked, his interest piqued. He leaned forward in his chair as if he were watching a good episode of true crime TV. All of the bodies were charred to the point of being unrecognizable, Deku answered grimly. Just like the building we had in June and the one in May, Uravati murmured. Deku nodded. Those are the ones that helped me to connect the dots, because honestly, he has changed his methods throughout the years, and it's clear to me it's based on his power level. How can you even guess that? Crow was shocked and intrigued, impressed with Deku's deductive skills but still willing to challenge his elder. I hate to compare myself to him, but I've gone through the same kind of power increases over the years with my own training, Deku explained, giving Crow a weak smile. That was right. Deku's Progress had always seemed like he was climbing a ladder, Uravati thought, and he dazzled the whole class whenever he overcame another rung. More control, more power, more abilities, it was naive to think he was the only one who could grow like that. Did that mean this villain trained himself so that he could murder more people in the same way Deku trained to save more people? Uravati shuddered at the thought. She knew people like that existed, but what did he gain from darkening his soul like that? Deku stood up and began to dismantle the stack of folders on the desk, laying out a timeline of attacks so that Uravati and Crow could follow his line of thinking. He then explained it all, holding his chin, as if he were saying this out loud for the first time and hoping it made as much sense out in the open to other human beings as it did in his head. The first crime was a single newspaper article Deku laid on the desk, stained deep yellow with age. Entire town chart, read the headline, in English, and a spooky black and white picture of a lonely house in the snow, wrapped in ribbons of police tape, accompanied it. He seems to be able to do more every time he strikes, which makes me think he's training the quirk between attacks. For instance, after his first massacre, he didn't commit another crime for 5 whole years. Deku laid out the next article, the headline just as ghastly. Then, he attacked another small town, in Alaska, and this time destroyed all of the houses. They were all burnt to the ground, and the occupants were only burned as an effect of being trapped. He then went silent for another 7 years. Deku laid out another article. Then he reappeared in California where he began to bring down bigger buildings. The first few times he did this, lots of the people survived, and it seems like his goal is to murder everyone in the building rather than just be destructive. When he reappeared some years later, he started charring the first floor worth of apartments. Another article was laid out. Then the next floor and then the next floor. Another article and another. He would target taller and taller buildings, doing it more and more often, based around how many floors worth of people he could char before bringing it down. The timeline ended with an entire folder of recent jobs. Crow's eyes widened and Uravati gulped, but they did this for different reasons. Guy, you went through all these case files in the 5 hours Uravati and I were walking earlier this week. Uravati gave him an exasperated side glance and Deku became flustered and put his hands up. And no, I'm trying to bring you guys up to speed. A lot of this timeline was put together by lots of American detectives as the crimes were committed. They were fairly certain the crimes were all committed by the same person, but his pattern is random, his motive is a mystery, no one's ever seen him, and without truly understanding his quirk, he's hard to confront or catch. My main job here is to unravel that last part. Oh, you were always so good at that, Uravati commented, flashing Deku a smile, causing him to go even more flush. Uravati couldn't see Crow, but heard him let out an amused sigh before speaking. So, how many stories is he able to cook? At this point, it seems like he can char 7 stories worth of apartments, leaving the upper floors to perish in the inevitable collapse. I'm guessing his fire is hot enough to weaken support beams. From some of these files, he appears to understand where such beams would be and can focus on taking them out. Uravati thought for a moment. But, I thought there were bombs. Is his quirk explosive like Bakugo's or is it like the Todoroki Hellfire? It appears to be both right now, but something really sticks out about the MO that has to be important to how it works. Every crime he's committed has happened in the summer, between the end of May and the beginning of September, and they have all happened around noon or after and only on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. So, he's got a day job, came Crow's conclusion with a smirk, and he pointed a finger gun at Deku. Uravati shook her head while Deku stood silent. Crow, no. Was Uravati's plea, but Crow felt he was onto something. Yeah, why else only attack on the weekends? Guy is busy during the week. Uravati couldn't tell if her student was serious or if it was his dark humor coming out in defense of the grim story they had just been told. She figured it the latter. I love where your head is at, but I'm pretty sure it has more to do with the fact that those times are the hottest parts of the day, and the weekends are when more people will be home, in their apartments, Deku said shakily. Or shopping at the store fronts. Uravati added. Yeah, he seems to have really perfected his technique, Deku said, his eyes falling on the mess of files on the desk. From all of this information, I've been able to really make some headway figuring out his quirk. It appears to have everything to do with ambient temperature. The only one that didn't happen in the summer was the first one. That one happened in winter, but that appears to have been a beginner's choice to ensure he'd get away with it, given the remoteness of the town, but Deku trailed and Uravati could see the gears turning in his head as the hand he held up to his chin reached his lips and his brow furrowed in extreme concentration. He was gone from the room, inverted into another plane of existence that was his own mind. Uravati waited a second before feeling the urge to prompt him, that urge coming from her student's confused staring. Unfortunately, she wasn't quick enough and Crow spoke. Deku, dude, you can't just stop in the middle of the story right when you get to the good parts. He threw his hands up as if someone's cell phone had rung in the movie theater. Uravati gave an annoyed sigh, but luckily Deku was too sweet, and perhaps too distracted, to take anything else but a grain of salt from Crow's crassness about the situation. Nevertheless, Deku returned and replied, sorry. I was just thinking that winter in Alaska is an endless night. Both Uravati and Crow sat in silence waiting for the revelation. Deku stood thinking again, but one hand reached into one of his red utility belt compartments, and emerged with a small, pocket-sized notebook with a pen. He flipped open the notebook to a page that already harbored his scribbles, and wrote as he spoke aloud, albeit in a mutter. So, his quirk doesn't need sunlight, per se, just a heat source, although he probably prefers ambient heat, it's readily available. So, he can suck out the heat from things. Or move the heat, Uravati tried, like, from a stove. Or a human body, Crow added darkly. Uravati stared at him. That's so morbid, Crow. What? That's something to consider. It really is, Deku murmured, and his consideration made them turn back to him. I wonder how he could weaponize 100 degrees, though. That's not nearly enough to ignite wood, let alone melt steel, or char the person. Perhaps he can amplify it. Uravati suggested. Maybe. This is assuming he can even do that. There aren't many quirks out there that can target living things outside of the user. Quote. He'd be pretty unique. Yeah, and can we assume he is able to move 100% of the heat he steals, if we're going to accept this theory? I just don't know. As Uravati discussed the specs of the villain's quirk, she noticed Crow sit up straight in his chair, his face becoming stern. She knew that look. It had only been 5 days, but she already recognized what it looked like when Crow's quirk activated. Guys, people are dying, he murmured. A lot. All at once. He sat, frozen to his chair, a pang of fear visibly moving through him as he sniffed the air lightly, turning his face up. Uravati traced his gaze past Deku and up the back wall where she could see an air conditioning vent. That's where the outside air was coming in and no doubt carrying the scent of death for Crow's keen nose to notice. Deku, meanwhile, grabbed his radio and considered it. No call had come over yet for the emergency Crow was sensing, but nevertheless, he followed Uravati's lead as she shoved her own radio into her fanny pack and donned her helmet. As the three young heroes made headway towards the door, the familiar booms began in the distance. 1, 2, 3. Uravati felt her stomach rise anxiously, the dread overcoming her as they crashed through the front doors of the office and bolted down the street. People were already running in the opposite direction, screaming, and car alarms wailed. Another 3 explosions sounded. Although she had never heard the explosions before, the way witnesses cried and shook as they recounted their experiences hearing them brought all her fear to the forefront. This was their guy. The one they had just been discussing had been just a block away. She could hear Deku's voice, stern, unwavering, but tense, as he reported the incoming rescue operation with possible suspect on scene, but her mind was too focused on just getting there to make out the details. Crow disappeared into the air, flying ahead to the end of the block. Uravati wasn't sure, in that moment, if Crow, as an intern, should have been allowed to leave the office building. She remembered that it had taken a lot of convincing to get Yukio on board with allowing her and Suyu to partake in a high-stakes raid when they were interning all those years ago. This surely would be on par, but she wasn't given a lot of time to mull it over or the opportunity to call her bird-like student back. He hovered at the end of the street, his wings flapping heavily as people ran past underneath him. Once Uravati and Deku made it onto the main avenue, they stopped and stared in horror. A 12-story apartment building sitting perfectly at the center of the intersection looked as if it had been licked 100 times by a giant flamethrower, black scars marring the once beautiful sandstone exterior of this building and its immediate neighbors. The fire was already roaring inside what was once the grocery store front like an angry monster, and it stretched into the next 7 stories of apartments, each window framing the flickering flames inside. Another loud boom rocked the pavement, blowing out more glass onto the street below, stopping the 3 young heroes from proceeding. A loud crunch reverberated through the hot summer air as the building gave way, collapsing each fiery floor flat, the heavy intact top floors aiding the vertical descent. Debris rained down on the cars and sidewalk as the building released a cloudy mixture of thick black smoke and sandy dust that raced towards them like floodwaters. Crow ducked back down the street they had come from to avoid getting hit by flying debris, and Uravati followed, the two of them stopping at the office doors. When she turned around, she saw Deku had stayed poised in the intersection, spreading his legs to brace and extending his arms in front of him, one ready with his middle finger tensely tucked against his thumb and the other to brace it. The stripes of lava snaked across his body before dissipating into the familiar bright green electricity Uravati had come to recognize as his quirk powering up. Her breath still became hitched in her throat, though. She wanted to trust Deku knew what he was doing. The block was more long than it was wide and surely he suspected the rest of the building would fall forward and crush him. Was he planning on catching the building? She knew he was strong, insanely powerful, actually, but to catch 5 stories of brick, stone, and mortar, she had to doubt that particular skill was in his repertoire. As the wave of dust washed over them, Uravati shut her eyes and heard, no, felt, the top 5 floors of the building slam onto the pavement and groan as it waned forward, falling like a tree that had been expertly cut. She cracked one eye open to witness Deku, in the thick mist, flick his finger at the oncoming building, sending a jet of air so powerful it stopped the building's descent for a split second, enough for him to pump energy into his legs and bounce out of the way. The rest of the building came crashing down, slamming into the asphalt, sending bits of debris, glass, and brick flying into the surrounding buildings. Despite the hard landing, the top half of the building stayed mostly together. That's what he was trying to do, Uravati surmised. He was trying to save as much of the building as possible by cushioning its landing. Now there might be survivors. Crow's cough jolted Uravati from her thoughts and she turned to tend to her student. He was holding his face, trying to shield from the dust as it settled. Uravati patted Crow on the back. Come on, let's start rescue, she said with some energy. To think that there might be some survivors they could pull out of this, maybe. This time would be different. Maybe this time, they would find someone and that person would survive, just to stick it to the awful villain who caused this. Deep down, Uravati knew it would be some time before other heroes showed up after all. These collapses never produced survivors, so surely they would be preoccupied with the injured that had been able to run away. It was up to the 3 of them to start the effort, it seemed. As Uravati and Crow approached the fallen building, she could hear the sirens already. It was incredibly quiet, as if the collapse had sucked all of the sound out from the surrounding area, and now the wailing from far-off ambulances could be heard. As they approached ever closer, it was clear the building had created a new structure. Where there had been an intersection was now a dead end. The apartments completely blocked off the streets. Anyone who had survived would need to be pulled out either from the broken windows or from the underside where the 7th floor had attached to the 8th. Deku was standing there, waiting for them to return. I'll scout from above, Crow offered when they reunited with Deku. He spread his black wings and launched himself into the air, still holding his hand over his nose and mouth. Through the dust, Uravati watched as her student hovered, surveying the damage and then shooting them a thumbs up that it was relatively safe for them to jump over. Uravati hugged herself, becoming weightless and gently skipped over the wall. Deku did just about the same thing as he pumped power into his legs and scaled the broken wall with a single leap. As Crow landed between them on the other side, Uravati looked around. The dust still hadn't quite settled, but she could see that the building had also blocked off the other intersection where the building once stood, creating a sort of square coliseum with the surrounding buildings. Additional edifices, storefronts, and apartments had been damaged in the landing as well, some with their entire faces scraped off to reveal the rooms within. "The hell?" came Crow's voice in the dust cloud. His voice was muffled as he continued to hold his nose and mouth. "The dust has nearly settled, you can," Uravati started but Crow cut her off. He shook his head, his eyes clamped shut. No. I don't feel so great, all the death, it's making me want to puke." "His quirk is getting overwhelmed," Deku commented empathetically to Uravati, who could only watch as her student struggled. "You can go back to the offices and wait for me there," Uravati offered, but Crow violently shook his head again. "No, you guys. I don't know how to explain this but the smell, it's getting closer," Crow choked out, squinting in Uravati's direction. "I have no idea how that's even possible, but it is." He trailed off as he stared past Uravati, his eyes becoming like saucers. Confused, she turned to Deku, who also looked as if he were seeing ghosts behind her. Cautiously, she turned around, gulping. Could it really be that awful? Yes. From the burned debris behind her, blackened bodies began to emerge, moaning. They became upright and started to walk towards them in a slow, stiff shamble. Uravati couldn't believe her eyes, and clearly, neither could her two partners. The corpses were completely black, scorched and burned to death by their main suspect before the building collapsed, with no real features to speak of besides their lipless mouths revealing just their teeth. Some of the bodies fell as they walked, their legs too charred to hold them up when walking didn't work. They crawled, leaving flakes of burnt black skin in their wake. "Okay, what's the plan?" Crow shouted as he whipped around to view more bodies oozing out of the cracks of the rest of the building behind him and Deku. Bloodied and mangled, these corpses, too, descended upon their location. In under a minute, the trio was surrounded. "Oi!" cried a voice from above as a black shadow swooped in. "Necro, you might want to hurry on the playtime, we got frickin' heroes here already." As he landed, his quirk was clear, brown bat wings and matching, long ears, big, black eyes, and a curled-up face just like that of a bat. When he smirked at the trio, long needle-like teeth emerged from the dried-out lips. But, cried another voice somewhere. "My friends. Make more friends." "These aren't dead yet," the bat growled and then disappeared back into the sky. At that notion, the corpses shambled closer, faster, until they were upon the young heroes like flies on the dead. It was time to fight, time to stop considering that these zombies were once helpless civilians. Uravati immediately switched to survival mode, grappling and dispatching the burned corpses that fell towards her with mouths open, ready to use their only weapons, their teeth. Uravati glanced over to her partners in maternal worry. Crow beat his wings, summoning gusts of wind to keep the bodies at bay, still clutching his face in a desperate attempt to control the putrid stench from invading his nostrils. Uravati wasn't sure how much of his desperation was about his quirk anymore, as the stink of burnt flesh threatened to make her sick as well. All the while, Deku was employing the same tactic as Crow, flicking bursts of air at the bodies to keep them away. Two large corpses bounded towards him, gurgling, and he easily dispatched them by summoning his black whips, wrapping them, and tossing them back into the building. Unfortunately, even as pieces, the deceased still tried to fight. Arms and legs came crawling back like inchworms to take him down. It was then Uravati felt something clamp onto her boot, and then her other one. Her automatic response was to quickly turn around and dislodge herself from what she was sure was the grasp of a corpse, but they were just arms she had dealt with earlier. Uravati let out a surprised squeal as she was met with a complete body that came hurtling towards her suddenly, knocking her to the ground. With all her strength she held the body at bay as its teeth snapped at her. It seemed to know her helmet visor was protecting her face, so it tried to bite at her shoulders and chest instead. Uravati grimaced, the blackened skin degloving in her grasp to reveal the well-done meat underneath. She needed to get out of this quickly before her arms went numb and the clapping jaws met her skin. Just then the body was pulled off of her and thrown back across the cement ravine into the wall of smoldering debris from whence it came. Uravati breathed a sigh of relief as she stared up at Deku, who was also running out of breath. He offered her his hand. "You're not out yet," he breathed, and she nodded, getting up off the ground. The mysterious voice from before screeched as its owner emerged from one of the damaged storefronts that had been stripped in the collapse. He was a tiny man with disheveled black hair and a small black mustache upon his lip. He wore dark clothing, and the circles under his eyes put the ones under Izuocha's to shame. This was the one the bat had referred to as Necro, and he certainly looked as though he had a screw loose and his patience was being tried. "I want your bodies." The electricity of Deku's power fired up, causing the hairs at the back of Uravati's neck to stand up straight, before he launched himself towards Necro. Unfortunately, the bat wasn't about to let the party die, and he intercepted Deku, crushing the green hero into the pavement with a slap of his wing. Necro used this as an opportunity to run towards the scorched legions still emerging from the debris. Deku wasn't done, however, and launched his foot towards the bat as he balanced on his hands. The bat swooped up, causing Deku to miss and instead slam into the bricks, his iron sole boot cracking the wall. "Kickin' to kill, eh? That doesn't seem so heroic, hero," the bat chided as he flapped away. He then addressed Necro, who cowered near the next wall. "Hey, why don't you get the big boy out? These assholes aren't going down easy." Necro nodded. At that moment, the bodies turned their attention towards Necro and began to shamble their way to him, as if in a trance. Uravati used this as an opportunity to regroup with Crow, and Deku joined them on the opposite side of the crater. They watched helplessly in horror as Necro brought the moaning bodies and pieces together, first into a writhing, bleeding ball around him, then covered it with the charred bodies like a black skin. The corpses molded themselves to look like a torso and finally came together as limbs to lift the new giant up. One burnt corpse lay at the helm, acting as the new horror's head, and screeched together with the 30 or so other dead in a cacophonous roar. Okay, that's worse, so much worse, Crow complained into his hands. He shut his eyes again, and, unable to stand the stench any longer, dropped to his knees. Uravati felt the sting of fear run down her spine as she worriedly looked to Deku, who also seemed nervous. The giant stood at least twice any of their heights. The bat giggled somewhere in the dusty mist as the horror bellowed again. You shitheads better die quickly or you're not going to have a good time. We have to break it apart and knock out the quirk user inside, Deku grit his teeth. Unfortunately, that was easier said than done. It was clear the horror was well built as it stomped towards them, rattling loose debris near each bloody footprint. But, it's way too dangerous to get close to it. Shaking her head, Uravati willed herself to focus. To think like Deku, one had to ask questions. How does this quirk work? What are its limitations? To her left, she eyed a huge chunk of brick and cement as an idea formed. How does the zombie see without any eyes? She slammed her hands on the giant piece of debris, making it float and then tossed it at the horror, releasing her anti-gravity just as it got close. Physics had never been her strongest subject in school, but adding some velocity to a heavy object to deliver a heavier punch was easily proven in practice. 2 o'clock, they heard the bat shout from somewhere, and the horror swung its arm to intercept the attack, breaking the artificial boulder into instant rubble. It howled again in anger. Deku turned to Uravati with the biggest smile, chasing the fear from her chest and replacing it with confidence and butterflies. Great work, he called. So, the bat is acting as its senses, let's test it some more, shall we? Uravati matched Deku's metal and began hurling more debris at the monster as Deku kicked up a flurry of smaller pebbles with his air blasts. As expected, the bat responded first. Big pieces from 2 o'clock, little shit from 11. The monster responded in kind, lifting its fat, right arm of bodies to block Uravati's debris shots and trying to swat aimlessly at Deku's smaller bullets. The pebbles hit the horror, scraping charred skin from its shoulders, revealing dark red meat underneath. They're right in front of you, the bat called again, and this time, the trio had to be on the defensive. The monster held up its big meaty arm and then charged, bellowing the cacophony of dead voices as it did. The three scattered, Uravati and Deku jumping to either side, Crow rocketing up into the air. The horror didn't stop, though, and crashed into the brick wall that was behind them, shaking the bricks and loosening debris that fell on top of it. Uravati, Deku, and Crow came together in the spot the monster had been standing moments before, keeping their eyes on it. 6 o'clock. The command had the monster whipping around and charging them again. The hero trio bounced out of the way once more as the giant slammed into the smoldering pile of building remains. Uravati bit her lip as she ran towards a wall still erected and attached to the collapsed apartments. This wasn't going anywhere, she thought grimly. As long as the bat could trace them unabated, they wouldn't be able to break the amalgamation of human remains apart and get to the necromancer inside. She disappeared behind the wall and leaned up against the linoleum of what was once someone's kitchen floor. She breathed heavily, becoming exhausted from a terrible combination of quirk overuse, physical exertion, and terror. Crow joined her side in this relatively safe enclosure, also out of breath from flying. Not a moment later, Deku appeared, his eyes wide in terror as he grabbed Uravity's arm and Crow's collar, pulling them down to the ground just as the giant bashed its body against the wall. It banged its arms on the ceiling over and over until it caved in, leaving the trio squished in a tiny triangle of space between the two walls. Not there. Where did those assholes go? Coulda sworn. They could hear the bat say. Deku peeked past the wall, his breathing still heavy. Uravity whispered in the quietest breath she could muster, "What's the plan?" Deku mouthed back to her, shaking his head, "I don't know." She could tell he was thinking hard as his eyes scanned their surroundings and their predicament. She looked to Crow and took a moment to be thankful all three of them were, for the most part, unscathed. Unfortunately, her student was still suffering, his eyelids heavy, sweating profusely, and his nose had begun to bleed as he coped with the unrelenting overstimulation of his quirk. Movement from her other side caused her to face Deku again, empathy clear on his face as he removed his metal face mask from his suit. He then climbed over Uravity and shoved it onto Crow's face, instantly relieving the younger hero of his pain. Crow began to breathe easy and shot him a thumbs up. Uravity watched as Deku settled back into his spot to think, his eyes sinking to the floor beneath them, his hand curling under his chin. An idea seemed to strike him, suddenly, and his eyes then met hers, intense and unwavering, and she felt the gist of the plan before he relayed it. She intimately knew how he worked, the types of plans he came up with, the information he craved to come to such conclusions. It shouldn't have shocked her so much that the strong friendship they had forged in high school hadn't rusted any in the 2 years they struggled to keep contact, but it did. The excitement of it made her heart flutter. She had missed this fluid collaboration she shared with him, the invasion of his infectious confidence, the feeling of closeness she didn't experience with anyone else. When he looked at her like that, she knew exactly what to do, and if Crow hadn't been there, he would not have needed to say anything at all. "We can break the zombie." Deku waved a finger between himself and Uravity, "but we need to get rid of the bat first." He was almost inaudible, but the plan was relayed to Crow enough to make the younger hero think. "I got him," Crow offered silently after a moment, and Uravity grabbed his arm. Her stare was intense. She couldn't just let her intern fight a villain all on his own. Crow seemed to understand this, but he gently removed her hand. "Don't worry, Mom, I got this." He then scuttled out of the tight space and took flight. It wasn't a moment later they heard the bat screech as Crow engaged him in an aerial battle, one that would shift his focus away from guiding the monster, leaving it blind. With the bat preoccupied, it was time to bring down the giant horror that stood before them. Uravity met eyes with Deku, his dauntless smile infusing a state of courageousness in her that she hadn't felt since last time they fought together. Their classmates had learned quickly that Ochako and Izuku were a force to be reckoned with, and soon this giant monster would learn it, too. She grabbed his shoulder and made him weightless. "They're going to attack you," the bat shouted as he struggled with Crow. "Hey, ugly, worry about yourself," Crow shouted as he chased the villain through the air. The bat's shout seemed to stun the beast and it swung haphazardly in all directions, but it would be no use. Deku powered up his quirk and leapt for the monster. Uravati ran parallel to him, releasing her quirk at just the right moment like she had with the first boulder she had thrown. Deku's iron-covered foot hit the giant so hard it created a crater in its side, charred skin flaked off and blood oozed from the hole. Deku then bounced away as the zombie swung its arms, the bodies there wailing. Uravati intercepted Deku, touching his shoulder again to steal his mass, and repeating the attack over and over again, perfectly synchronized to deliver an onslaught the monster could not keep up with. Deku hit the monster in its arm once, twice, 3 times before the limb fell off, battered and broken in a bloody mess. Each time, Uravati ran across the battlefield to meet Deku and offer her quirk, only to release it at the precise moment he would make contact. It was like a gruesome waltz they danced to bring down the moaning, crying atrocity. Now she was fearless. Now they were getting somewhere. The exhaustion, though, was catching up to her, and Uravati willed the burning in her legs away in order to meet Deku wherever he needed her. His quirk was incredible. From a distance, it looked like he wasn't even feeling it, wasn't getting tired, wasn't disgusted by the monstrosity he was fighting. After the second arm came down, and Uravati met with Deku to provide quasi-flight again, she realized how wrong that was. He was soaking wet from sweat and his chest heaved each tired breath. It seemed crazy to her, but he looked like he was enjoying it, still. The fact that they were succeeding was enough for him to continue, despite how his body shook under her fingertips as she extended her quirk to him yet again. And so, they continued. Each smash seemed to make the monster more and more anxious as it spun around, trying to figure out from what direction Deku would hit it from next. It was all in vain, though, as Deku continued to kick holes in the monster's abdomen, scrap burned flesh away, and dismantle the beast. It truly had no outward senses, and only responded to being hit, stomping at the ground where it wrongly guessed Deku still was. It was still a dangerous game Deku was playing, and eventually, the monster guessed right. As Deku came in from behind, the monster turned around in a manic rage, stomping its feet. It was too late to stop the incoming attack, and the monster's foot, essentially a few crushed bodies, swiped at Deku, knocking him back. Uravati quickly released her quirk, leaving Deku on his back, reeling from the kick to his stomach. The giant zombie seemed to know it had hit something, guessed that its attacker was still somewhere in front of it, and started to charge. Without a moment's hesitation, Uravati jumped into action. She had absolutely no idea where this burst of energy had come from, but the visual cue that Deku was in serious mortal danger was all it took to spring her forward like a slingshot. She reached him before the monster did, made him weightless by clutching his arm with all 5 fingers, and yanked him out of the way. The monster came barreling through the area not a moment later, crashing down each footfall with the intent to squash Deku like a bug, leaving many craters in its wake. A section of the asphalt suddenly caved in under the monster's heavy foot, and tripped it so violently, it smacked the ground with a bone-crunching crash. A number of burned bodies fell off the back of the creature, and it screamed with 30 dead voices in frustrated agony. Deku took this opportunity to part from Uravati and jump up onto the monster's back. Uravati released her anti-gravity, and Deku got to work excavating Necro from the monster. The giant zombie kicked and wailed, but with no arms, it struggled to get up. Deku ripped and tore into the monster's back like a savage animal, bits and pieces of flesh flying everywhere, blood splattering onto his wet hero costume. It was clear then, to Uravati, that Deku had just about enough of this fight and was desperate to end it. He had torn a giant hole into the back of the monster, reached in and pulled Necro out from the monster's core. The tiny man was covered in blood from head to toe, and he hissed at Deku's angry visage. "Bastard!" Necro cried. "He was beautiful. And you destroyed him. Destroyed him. Destroyed him." Deku said nothing as he retrieved handcuffs from one of his utility belt pockets, and forcefully attached them to Necro's wrists. Ochako could see the hurt in Izuku's eyes. What he had just done was inconceivable. Tearing through dead bodies to apprehend the criminal was something she knew would stick with him for some time. Hell, it was going to stick with her for a long time, too. Never in her life could she imagine the sweet, amiable Izuku needing to make killing strikes and desecrating the dead, but here he had done just that. At that moment, Crow came down with the bat under his foot. He slammed the other villain hard into the broken battlefield, knocking him out. "Nevermore, bitch," Crow yelled, and then chuckled to himself. Uravati fell backwards onto her behind, the adrenaline wearing off to reveal the intense soreness in her legs. She shook her head at Crow. He sure was awful today, and wondered if his dark humor had a limit. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Deku smirk for a split second at the slightly inaccurate reference, so perhaps there was some use to it after all. Soon enough, other heroes showed up, removing wreckage, beginning recovery efforts, and rescuing survivors. As it turned out, to the trio's surprise, there had been survivors trapped in the stairwell, and as the building fell, the hard concrete of that inner wall, as well as Deku's ploy to soften the building's landing, had saved them. They were still in critical condition, and as they were loaded into the backs of ambulances on standby, Uravati looked to Crow to check if it was okay to have some hope. He nodded. Finally, there was some good news today. From behind, Nijire and Yukio joined the trio. "Thank goodness you are all okay," Yukio said, her worry unprecedented. When they finally convinced her they were okay, her demeanor changed to relief and business. "Okay. Give me the quick and dirty report. What's the total damages?" The dragon heroine was using this as a teaching tool as she zeroed in on Crow. Uravati kept her mouth shut and allowed Crow the floor, who smirked and answered, "Down 12-story, many casualties, and about 30 dead twice." He was dead serious. Uravity's head fell into her palm and she shook her head. She gave up trying to reel in Crow's crass commentary on the dead, but Yukio took it in stride. Somehow she understood her newest intern's need for humor in this crisis. Uravity thought a bit more as Crow tried to relay exactly what they had been up against, and it occurred to her that maybe he was beyond her when it came to accepting the laundry list of harsh truths. He had faced death his whole life no thanks to his quirk, maybe. All he had to emerge from it sane was a little bit of laughter towards the darkness. Yukio seemed to get it, although her way of dealing with the darkness was rooted in compassion for the living and buttering up her staff when the abyss came calling, which she did now. Despite Yukio's good graces, Uravity suddenly felt a pang of anxiety, a glaring lapse in her own judgment and authority she needed to address to her elder. Either way, she started, looking down at the pavement. I shouldn't have allowed Crow to stay in combat. It was so dangerous and reckless. I messed up. I told you I could handle it, he was just a bat. Crow tried to defend what had happened, but Uravity became even more upset. Even still, it was dangerous and it wasn't clear whether or not it was safe. When your quirk was getting overwhelmed, I should have immediately sent you back to the office, no questions asked. And I would have said no. Who is going to get that bad bastard but me? That's not the point. Yukio stared at the ensuing argument, her expression unchanged from the soft, understanding visage it had been. Deku spoke up from behind Uravity, attempting to assuage the situation, more so for his friend's anxiety. To be honest, we all went in thinking it would just be a rescue operation. By the time we realized what we were dealing with, it was too late. We needed the third person, otherwise, we really would have been at a greater disadvantage. Yukio nodded. It's so wonderful how you are evaluating yourself, Uraraka. You see areas for improvement, you're aware of your shortcomings and mistakes, and I really appreciate that. You know, the reason why I put Dakuro-kun under your care is because he's so gung-ho and will fight you about your decisions. You've clearly been able to work around it and use his ambitious personality to help take down villains. Yo, I'm standing right here, Crow mumbled. And not only that, but I think he has learned a little bit about his own limits through this, isn't that right, Dakuro-kun? Yukio turned towards him knowingly, and the Dark Angel hero in training scratched the back of head bashfully, pink staining his cheeks. I need a face mask if I'm going to tag along on recovery missions. He tried. Then he jumped, remembering Deku's mask was still around his neck, and returned the gear to its rightful owner. Yukio snickered, then laughed. Yes, something like that. See if you can get UA's support text to fashion you one as soon as possible. In the meantime, why don't the three of you head back to the offices and take the rest of the day to rest? Flashlight should be here shortly after he's sent the work studies home. That sounds good. Thank you, Yukio, Uravity said graciously, bowing to her. Yukio was all about positive reinforcement, and Uravity knew she'd never be able to count all the perks of being under the Dragon Lady's wing. Yukio smiled and then turned to Deku, a thought crossing her mind. Deku, when do you think they will cross-examine these two villains? She asked. Deku mulled the question around before answering. Given the severity and the fact that we're trying to catch the villain responsible for the actual collapse, I'd say early tomorrow morning. Wonderful. Would it be okay if Crow and Uravati joined to watch the interrogation? For educational purposes, Yukio asked. Deku nodded. Yeah, that would be fine. There will probably be a ton of personnel there to watch the interrogation. Great. Uravati, you're taking overtime to go to the interrogation and feel free to stay and work out the case more, Yukio ordered. And Crow, as a student at UA, I can't make it mandatory that you arrive to work on a weekend, but I highly recommend that you join them. Crow saluted. Yes, ma'am. Ochako could not will herself to walk the few blocks back to her apartment this way. Smelly from sweat, blood, and only God knew what else. She needed to take a shower right now. Crow hadn't cared. He quickly changed into clean clothes, splashed some water on his face, and skipped out of the office, promising to lay into all of the gruesome details to whatever poor soul asked. She had done everything she could to convince him not to do that, and when he finally bid her goodbye, she still wasn't sure if he would keep the day's events to himself. As Ochako turned on the shower and let the warm water wash over her filthy skin, she pondered Yukio's reasons for plopping such a brazen intern into her lap. Surely this one was a handful. He had started out so sweet, understanding, and willing to learn, but after their second or third run-in with death that week, his true colors had emerged. He was still friendly, but everything was a joke, like he was constantly trying to remain sane in an insane world through the tenets of comedy. If that were the case, then Ochako couldn't blame him too much. She had seen the toll hero work had taken on Flashlight. Every failed save weighed heavily on him, depressed him, and, she feared, convinced him to quit. On the flip side, she had become stalwart against death and the fragility of people. It didn't make the work any less grueling, and sometimes the missed saves weighed her down more than the successes lifted her up. In that sense, then maybe Crow had a reason to laugh. Maybe it was the best way to separate the dead body from who it used to be. Maybe Yukio gave her Crow so that she could learn to handle death in a new way, or maybe she assigned Asuka Dakuro to study under Ochako Uraraka precisely because he was a pain in the ass and she needed to learn to take charge. Whatever it was, she had to admit he made this test of her skills to become pro partner that much more challenging. Lost in thought, she rubbed the bar soap across her skin. It was no body scrub like she had at home, but it was a sacrifice she was willing to make if it meant ridding herself of the zombie fluids. She jumped slightly upon hearing the door to the locker room open, and she found herself a bit confused and bare, despite the fact she had closed the shower curtain. The locker room of the Yukio offices was a single, unisex area where everyone could store their belongings in personal lockers as well as change and shower in separated stalls. The bathrooms were thankfully still separate, the boys' room to the right, the girls' to the left. It even had a washer, dryer, and sink to clean hero gear. Yukio had withheld no expense to ensure a hero or sidekick could live here if standbys were necessary, and it was just another thing that helped Ochako feel so at home. The plop of a bag and more rustling jolted her from her thoughts again and she inquired into the space. Dakuro. No, it's me, came Izuku's voice. Now she was really feeling bare. It wasn't as if she hadn't changed or showered with flashlight in the next stall, or any other male work study for that matter, but there was clearly something different about this arrangement. When the other shower head turned on, Ochako felt her cheeks heat up. Don't think about it, don't think about it, don't think about it. I'm really glad this office has showers. Sorry I couldn't wait. I couldn't go on the train covered in zombie juices, Izuku said over the separator, as if he felt the need to explain himself. Had he thought about it? Ochako giggled nervously. Yeah, tell me about it. She then winced as she realized what had escaped her mouth, and her mind took it as an invitation to fill in the blanks. A moment of silence crept by, and Ochako felt the awkwardness build as the weight of knowing they were occupying the same space completely naked and wet grew heavier. She needed to escape these thoughts, at least for right now. Yeah, I couldn't even bring myself to walk home the few blocks, she added quickly. It was. She sighed, apparently seesawing with the idea of discussing it, a pretty gruesome fight. Izuku hummed in agreement, his mind seemingly elsewhere at the reminder of the day's events. Scenes from the fight and the sheer terror raced through her mind. Real people, perhaps 100 of them, perished today in a single attack. Men, women, and children had been roasted alive to the point of blackening and then reanimated to do the bidding of a psychotic madman. It was clear the bat and the necromancer weren't the ones that had set the blaze. No, that had to be their mystery villain. Had he been at the scene, or had he escaped immediately before the building even came down? Why did these villains stay? Where did they come from? Izuku was silent. She could hear him go about washing the sins he had had to commit today away, and the thought of it dug into her. Being a hero was so easy in the eyes of the public. Do good. Save people. But it really wasn't so simple at the end of the day, was it? People got hurt, people died, and villains didn't have to care who got hurt or who died in the crossfires of their desires and the means to get them. Heroes had to care, but in this instance, Deku didn't have a choice but to disregard them like a villain would. The necromancer had blanketed himself in the dead bodies of another villain's actions, and the only way to stop the fight and save their skins was to break those bodies again. There was no telling what story the police department would have to construe to defend Deku's actions, or maybe they would simply sweep them under the rug and fully blame the villains for it. Law enforcement wasn't pretty. Ochako knew no matter what happened, no matter what had to be done, Izuku was not okay with it. The faucet squeaked as she shut the water off, the once hot water betraying her as the steam dissipated and the cold air sapped the heat away. She grabbed the towel she had hanging just outside her shower stall and began to dry herself. She felt terrible and angry. It wasn't fair or right. Such a wonderfully bright hero was forced to walk into the darkness today, and he had been swallowed up by the impenetrable shadows there. She shook her head and willed those useless feelings away. Right now, she had someone to save. She put on her street clothes and took a deep breath as his faucet squeaked and the water stopped. She was her own hero, but with the sudden reunion with Izuku, she felt a higher calling. He was so strong and capable of really anything, except being his own support. He was always like that, in constant need of grounding and reassurance, and if that's where he needed her, then she would be there. She could take that role. It's not your fault, she said into the echo of the locker room. There was a pause. Somewhere in their past, the connection of their thoughts had become second nature. They could finish each other's sentences, come up with similar strategies, trust each other unconditionally, and it was the same now despite the awkward silence. He didn't need her to clarify what she meant. I know, came his voice, a little shaky. She could hear him pulling on street clothes. You did what had to be done. She didn't feel it necessary to elaborate that sometimes heroes had to step into the darkness to snuff it out. That heroes were expected to use force against villains, and this time was no different. He knew all these things already. His voice trembled. It was horrible, what I had to do. It was heroic. Ochako had put herself directly in front of his shower stall so that when he pushed the curtain away, she'd be the first thing he saw. His hair was still pretty wet, and it added to his dejectedness. She put on her best bubbly smile as she looked into his glassy eyes, emanating positivity to counteract his mournfulness. We do what has to be done, no matter how awful, because we're heroes. We do it so they don't have to, she reminded him. I don't know anyone else who does that as effortlessly without question, as you do, Deku. She was sure her buttering game had become even stronger while under Yukyu's wing, and it showed. His frown became a squiggle of bashful gratitude. Thanks Uraraka. You always know how to make me feel better, he murmured, his tiny grin becoming a sweeter smile that extended to his eyes, his cheeks stained pink. Her heart was on fire. Anytime, she squeaked, her cheeks becoming more rosy as well. Ochako grabbed her gym bag and hero suit from her shower stall and moved over to the far wall where the washer was set up. You can wash your suit here, too. Oh, that would be great. Izuku said relieved, and snatched his own suit to drop into the machine. As he put it in, Ochako could see it was incredibly filthy. Blood, sweat, dust, dirt, charcoal, what? Wasn't absorbed into the fabric. So, what time should Crow and I be at the station tomorrow morning? Ochako asked as the machine hummed on. Izuku stared at her for a moment and then grimaced. I almost forgot. I'm not going home, I still need to write up the report for this. Don't tell me you have more to do. Ochako whined as Izuku nodded. He began walking away, grabbed his gym bag from the shower stall, and stopped at the door as he answered. Yeah, I have to do the write-up, make notes about their quirks, they need to be checked in, booked, and the proper restraints need to be ordered. Then the detective needs to get called in. I'll probably end up sleeping at the station for a few hours before the interrogations. Ochako sighed, feeling sorry for him. Maybe, can I help you with any of that? I'm not doing anything tonight. Izuku flashed her a smile. Nah, go get some rest. I'd say come in about 8 a.m. tomorrow. That's usually when the detective will come in. All right, she said uneasily as they left the locker room. I'll text Crow about it, just don't forget to eat something and actually get some sleep. Izuku chuckled. I'll be okay. Don't worry about me so much. But how could she not? Share. Where stories live. Discover now.